The twin suns of Rust Haven hung low in the sky, casting long shadows over the dusty town. A warm breeze carried the scent of dry earth and rusted metal, mixing with the faint hum of hovering speeder bikes parked outside the Last Shot saloon. The town was quiet today. Everyone had gathered at Boot Hill Cemetery, where the greatest cowboy Rust Haven had ever known was being laid to rest. Chase Colton stood among the mourners, his hat pulled low over his eyes. He wasn't the type to show emotion, but today was different. Jedediah Jed McGraw had been more than just a legend. He had been a mentor, a father figure to him. And now, the old cowboy was gone. The preacher finished the ceremony, saying the final words before Jed's steel-reinforced coffin was lowered into the ground. The crowd slowly started to disperse, murmuring about the end of an era. Jace lingered a little longer, staring at the grave. "You always said you'd outlive us all, old man," he thought. "Guess even legends have to ride off into the sunset someday." A rough voice pulled him from his thoughts. "Jace Colton." Jace turned to see a tall man in a dark coat, his expression unreadable. He had the look of a lawman, or maybe a bounty hunter, someone who had seen too much of the galaxy. "Yeah, that's me." The man reached into his coat and pulled out a small holoscroll, handing it to Jace. "Jed McGraw left this for you, his final will." Jace hesitated before taking it. He tapped the activation button, and a flickering blue hologram of Jed McGraw appeared. The old cowboy's voice was rough but steady. "If you're hearing this, kid, means I finally kicked the bucket. Reckon that was bound to happen sooner or later. Listen close now, 'cause I ain't got much time in this message." Jace swallowed hard as he listened. "I'm leaving you my ranch, the whole spread. Barn, cyber horses, all of it. But that ain't the only thing I'm leaving you. There's something, or someone, you gotta take care of. You'll find her at the ranch. Protect her, Jace. The stars ain't kind to her kind." The message flickered out. Jace stood there, gripping the holoscroll tightly. The old man was never one for riddles, but this. What had he meant by someone? There was only one way to find out. The ranch and the mysterious girl. Jace rode out to McGraw Ranch on his hoverbike, kicking up a trail of dust as he sped across the open plains. The land stretched for miles, golden grass swaying under the evening light. The ranch house stood like a lone sentinel against the horizon, its weathered wooden walls telling stories of years gone by. He parked outside, stepping onto the front porch. Everything looked the same. Jed's old rocking chair, the smell of engine grease and fresh hay, and the faint hum of the automatic livestock drones in the distance. But there was something new, something out of place. The front door was slightly open. Jace's hand instinctively went to the pulse revolver on his hip as he pushed the door wider. Inside, the air was still. Sunlight streamed through the dusty windows, illuminating the old furniture. And then he saw her. She stood near the fireplace, a girl with glowing blue eyes. Jace froze. She wasn't human. Her skin shimmered with a faint silver hue, and her hair was a cascade of dark blue strands that seemed to move like liquid silk. She looked young, maybe around his age, dressed in a simple tunic that didn't seem to belong to this world. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then, finally, she broke the silence. "You're not Jed McGraw." Her voice was soft but firm. There was no fear in her eyes, only cautious curiosity. Jace cleared his throat, tipping his hat back. "No, ma'am. Name's Jace. Jed. He's gone." Something flickered across her face. An emotion Jace couldn't quite place. Sadness. Resignation. Whatever it was gone in an instant. "I know," she said quietly. Jace exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "Mind telling me who you are, and why in the galaxy Jed wanted me to look after you?" She hesitated before answering. "My name is Zara. I am the last of my kind." Jace frowned. The last of her kind. That sounded like trouble. Last of what kind, exactly? Zara glanced at the window. as if checking for something beyond the horizon. Then she met his gaze again, her glowing eyes filled with something deeper, something old, something dangerous. The Seraphim. Jace had heard that name before. The Seraphim were supposed to be extinct, a race of beings with strange, unexplainable powers, a race that had been hunted down and wiped out. And now, standing in front of him, was one of them. Jace let out a slow breath. Well, ain't that something? The weight of responsibility. That night, Jace sat on the porch, staring at the twin moons overhead. Inside, Zara rested, though he could tell she wasn't fully at ease. Jed had left her in his care. But why? What was he supposed to do now? One thing was clear. If the wrong people found out she was here, there'd be trouble. Big trouble. Jace had never backed down from a fight. But this was different. He wasn't just protecting a ranch anymore. He was protecting the last of an entire species. And something told him the galaxy wouldn't let that go unanswered. As the wind howled through the plains, Jace tightened his grip on his revolver. Whatever was coming, he'd be ready. Because cowboys don't run. Cowboys stand their ground. Jace Colton woke up before sunrise, just like he always did. The air was cool, the sky painted in soft shades of purple and gold. Normally, mornings on McGraw Ranch were peaceful. Today, though, there was a strange feeling in the air, like a storm was coming, even though the skies were clear. He stepped onto the porch, stretching his arms before heading toward the barn. The cyber horses inside were restless, their metal hooves tapping against the dirt floor. They sensed something different. Jace knew why. Inside the ranch house, Zara was still asleep, the alien girl who had been left in his care. The last of the Seraphim. Jace still didn't know what to make of her. She wasn't like anything he had ever seen before. The way her silver skin shimmered in the moonlight, the way her glowing blue eyes seemed to see straight through him. It was unsettling. And the way she talked with a quiet confidence, like she had seen things no human ever could. Why did Jed take her in? Jace wondered. And why did he trust me to protect her? He didn't have answers, but he knew one thing. If Jed McGraw had made a promise, then it was important. And Jace wasn't about to break that trust. The stranger in town. Later that morning, Jace saddled up his hoverbike and rode into Rust Haven to pick up supplies. He needed food, fuel, and more than anything, answers. The town was waking up, merchants setting up stalls, bounty hunters gathering outside the Last Shot saloon, and old farmers gossiping on the dusty streets. The place hadn't changed, but today, something felt off. Jace parked his bike and walked toward the general store, nodding to a few familiar faces. Then he saw him, a stranger in a black coat, standing by the saloon, scanning the crowd. He wasn't from Rust Haven. That much was clear. He had the look of a tracker, someone who had spent his life hunting people, not animals. And he wasn't alone. Two more men stood near him, both wearing matching insignias on their sleeves. A crimson viper coiled around a star. Jace's stomach tightened. He knew that symbol. The Red Vipers, a band of mercenaries who worked for the highest bidder, smugglers, bounty hunters, and worse, slave traders. And if they were here, that meant they were looking for someone. Jace forced himself to stay calm. He walked into the store, acting normal, but his mind was racing. They're looking for Zara. It had to be. The truth about Zara. Back at the ranch, Zara stood outside, feeling the warm sunlight on her skin. She didn't belong here, not on this planet, not in this quiet place where humans lived simple lives. But Jed had saved her, and now Jace was protecting her. Even though he barely knew her, she should leave. It would be safer. But where would she go? She closed her eyes, remembering the last time she had used her true power. The memory was sharp, painful, a fleet of warships burning in the sky, screams echoing across the void. She hadn't meant to destroy them. But when she was afraid, when she was cornered, The energy inside her had unleashed itself. And now, the galaxy knew that a Seraphim still lived. A sound pulled her from her thoughts. Hoverbike engines. Fast. Coming this way. She turned toward the horizon and saw Jace riding toward the ranch, dust swirling behind him. When he reached the porch, he jumped off the bike and grabbed her arm. "We got trouble." Ziara blinked. "What happened?" "Red Vipers. They're in town. Asking questions." Her heart pounded. They had found her. "Jace," she said carefully, "if they take me, they won't let me live." Jace looked at her, then at the endless plains stretching beyond the ranch. He had two choices, run or fight. And Jace Colton wasn't the running type. "No one's taking you anywhere." He walked inside and grabbed Jed's old rifle, checking the energy cartridge. It was still good. Then he tossed her a satchel. "Pack light. We might have to move fast." Ziara hesitated. "You don't have to do this." Jace smirked, tipping his hat. "Yeah. Well, I ain't much for letting folks get taken." The first shot. They didn't have to wait long. An hour later, the Red Vipers arrived. 5 of them, riding sleek black hoverbikes, dust kicking up behind them. They stopped at the ranch gate, their leader, a tall man with a scar across his jaw, raising a hand. "We know you got something that don't belong to you." Jace stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand, eyes cold. "Not sure what you're talking about, friend." The leader chuckled. "Oh, I think you do." He pulled out a holo device and activated it. A flickering image appeared, a wanted poster with Ziara's face. "She's worth a fortune, Cowboy. Don't be stupid. Hand her over, and you walk away rich." Jace's grip tightened on the rifle. Ziara stood behind him, her hands clenched into fists. The air around her shimmered slightly. The Red Vipers didn't know it yet, but they had just made the worst mistake of their lives. The Red Vipers sat on their hoverbikes at the ranch gate, the engines humming softly, waiting for Jace's answer. The leader, Scarjaw, smirked, tapping the wanted holo poster floating above his wrist device. Ziara's face flickered in the blue light, her glowing eyes staring back at them. "We don't got all day, Cowboy," Scarjaw said, his voice rough. "Hand her over, and we leave without any trouble." Jace stood firm on the porch, rifle in hand. He wasn't a fool. He knew how mercenaries like the Vipers worked. Even if he gave them Ziara, they'd kill him to leave no witnesses. But he had already made his choice. He shifted his stance slightly, keeping the rifle steady. "Ain't gonna happen, friend." The Red Vipers exchanged glances, a few chuckling under their breath. "Oh." Scarjaw tilted his head. "You plan to take on all of us? You got guts, Cowboy. But guts don't stop plasma rounds." Jace exhaled slowly, his mind sharp. He needed to stall, buy time to figure out his next move. "Mighty big bounty for one girl," he said, nodding toward the holo poster. "Who wants her bad enough to send a pack of cutthroats like you?" Scarjaw's smirk widened. "Now that ain't your concern." "Maybe not. But I'd like to know what makes her worth more than a whole town's yearly earnings." Scarjaw glanced at Ziara, standing behind Jace on the porch. His eyes flickered with something. Fear, maybe even respect. "The Seraphim were wiped out," he said. "Or so we thought. Turns out, one survived. And there are people willing to pay a fortune to get their hands on her." Jace didn't like the way he said, "people." This wasn't just some random bounty. Someone powerful wanted Ziara, and that meant the Vipers were just the beginning. Scarjaw's patience was running out. "I won't ask again. Step aside, Cowboy." Jace sighed. "Can't do that." The leader's smirk vanished. "Then you die with her." The fight begins. Jace moved first. He fired a shot from his rifle, the blue plasma bolt tearing through the air. It struck one of the Viper's bikes, sending the man flying as the machine exploded in a burst of flames. The remaining mercenaries drew their weapons. "Kill him," Scarjaw barked. Blaster fire lit up the air as the Red Vipers opened fire. Jace dived behind a wooden beam, bullets and plasma bolts shredding the porch around him. Zira clenched her fists. The air around her started to shimmer, waves of invisible energy pulsing from her skin. She could feel the power building inside her, the same force that had destroyed warships before. She didn't want to use it. She was afraid of what might happen. But Jace was fighting for her. She couldn't just stand there. Ziara took a deep breath and stepped forward. The Red Vipers saw her and aimed their weapons. Target acquired. Take her. Before they could fire, Zara's eyes blazed like twin stars. A pulse of blue-white energy exploded outward, knocking the mercenaries back as if a shockwave had hit them. The ground trembled, dust rising into the air. Jace peeked from behind cover, eyes widening. "Well, Dan." One of the Vipers groaned, trying to stand. Ziara lifted her hand, and the very air around him solidified, locking him in place like an invisible cage. "Leave," she said, her voice cold and commanding, "or you will not get another chance." Scarjaw, coughing from the dust, stared at her with fury and something close to fear. He scrambled to his feet, glaring at Jace. "This ain't over." He signaled to his men, and the remaining Vipers jumped on their bikes and sped away, disappearing into the horizon. Jace let out a breath, lowering his rifle. That was close. Ziara turned to him, her glowing eyes dimming slightly. "I didn't mean to do that." Jace chuckled, shaking his head. "Not complainin'. Reckon you just saved both our hides." She looked down at her hands, a troubled expression on her face. "I told you," she whispered. "I'm dangerous." Jace studied her for a moment. "Maybe. Asterisk, asterisk. But so am I, asterisk, asterisk." She looked up, surprised. He wasn't afraid of her. Jace tipped his hat and gave a small grin. "Simon, let's get inside before more trouble comes knocking. A bigger problem." That night, Jace sat on the porch, cleaning his rifle. Ziara sat beside him, quiet. The desert wind was cool, carrying the distant sound of nocturnal creatures. "They'll come back," she said finally. Jace nodded. "Yeah, and probably bring friends. You don't have to protect me." Jace exhaled. "Jed left you in my care. That means something to me." She looked at him, studying his face. "Why? You don't even know me." Jace smirked. "Don't need to. I know good folk when I see 'em." Ziara looked away, her expression unreadable. "I don't think I'm good, Jace." He didn't answer right away. Instead, he stared at the stars. "Guess we'll find out together." Inside the house, Jed's old radio crackled to life. A transmission came through, a warning from the Rust Haven sheriff. The Red Vipers had sent a message to their employer. And now, bounty hunters from across the galaxy were coming. For Ziara. And for Jace Colton. The night was quiet, but Jace Colton knew it wouldn't stay that way for long. He sat on the porch of McGraw Ranch, his rifle across his lap, staring at the open desert. The Red Vipers had retreated, but they weren't gone for good. They had sent a message to their employer, to bounty hunters, to anyone willing to take a dangerous job for a lot of credits. And that meant one thing. More trouble was coming. Inside the house, Ziara was pacing. She had barely spoken since the fight. Jace had seen the look on her face. Fear, regret, something deeper. She was afraid of herself, afraid of the power inside her. Jace sighed and stood up, walking inside. "You should get some sleep." Ziara shook her head. "I can't. If I sleep, I'll dream." Jace leaned against the wall. "Bad dreams." She hesitated, then nodded. "Memories of what I've done." Jace didn't push. He knew people carried scars you couldn't see. Instead, he walked to the table and opened a small metal box. Inside was an old wanted poster, not Zara's, but his own. She noticed and frowned. "You have a bounty." Jace smirked. "Had one. A long time ago. Sheriff cleared it after I helped him take down some raiders." Ziara picked up the holo poster. It showed a younger Jace wearing a cocky grin. Wanted. Alive. For armed robbery. She raised an eyebrow. Robbery? Jace chuckled. I was 16. Stole some supplies from a mining corp that was starving out settlers. They called it theft. I called it justice. Ziara studied him. You don't seem like a criminal. He shrugged. And you don't seem like a monster. She looked away, but Jace saw the flicker of emotion in her glowing eyes. Before she could say anything, the radio crackled. A voice came through. The sheriff of Rusthaven. Jace, you there? Jace grabbed the receiver. Yeah, I'm here. The sheriff's voice was tense. You need to get out. Now. Jace's jaw tightened. Who's coming? Everyone. Word's out. Ziara's bounty went up. 5 million credits. Ziara's breath caught. 5 million. Jace swore under his breath. That kind of money would bring every outlaw, bounty hunter, and mercenary in the sector. The sheriff continued. I'll do what I can to slow them down, but you can't stay put. You need to run. Jace looked at Ziara. She was gripping the table, her face pale. Running wasn't an option. Not anymore. The first hunters arrive. An hour later, dust clouds rose in the distance. Jace stood at the fence, watching. Ziara stood beside him, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. A black hover truck rolled to a stop near the gate. The engine cut off, and 2 figures stepped out, bounty hunters. One was a tall, thin man with cybernetic eyes that glowed red. The other was a muscular woman with a scar down her cheek. Jace sighed. Let me guess, you're here for the girl. The cyborg grinned. We can do this easy, Cowboy. You hand her over, and we ride out rich. Or, he patted the plasma pistol on his hip. We do it the fun way. Jace tilted his hat back. Ain't interested in either. The woman snorted. Figures. People like you always wanna play hero. Ziara stepped forward, her silver skin catching the moonlight. You don't want to do this. The cyborg laughed. Oh, we really do. Jace saw it coming before the bounty hunter even reached for his gun. He moved first. His rifle fired, the plasma bolt hitting the cyborg square in the chest. The bounty hunter staggered back, sparks flying from his damaged circuits. The woman cursed and drew her weapon. But before she could fire, Ziara lifted her hand. A pulse of invisible force ripped through the air, sending the bounty hunter flying backward, slamming into the truck. She hit the ground hard and didn't move. The cyborg, still standing, roared in anger and charged at Jace. His metal fist swung forward, too fast to dodge. Ziara stepped between them. Her eyes glowed bright, like twin stars. The cyborg froze mid-step, his entire body locked in place. He struggled, his circuits sparking, his red eyes flickering in panic. Ziara's voice was quiet but firm. Leave. With a flick of her fingers, the cyborg was thrown back into the truck. The impact dented the metal. He groaned, struggling to stand. His partner was unconscious. Their truck was wrecked. Jace lowered his rifle. I'd suggest taking her advice. The cyborg didn't argue. He dragged his partner into the hover truck, started the failing engine, and sped off into the night. Jace let out a slow breath. Ziara looked at her hands. It's getting stronger. Jace didn't know much about her powers, but he knew one thing. If more bounty hunters came, and they would, she'd need to use them again. A dangerous plan. Inside the ranch, Jace checked his ammo supply. It wasn't enough. He turned to Ziara. We can't fight them all. We need a plan. She frowned. You mean to run? Jace shook his head. No, I mean to end this. Ziara looked at him, confused. How? Jace leaned against the table. We find out who put the bounty on you, and we take the fight to them. Ziara hesitated. That's dangerous. Jace smirked. So's sittin' here waitin' to die. She studied him for a long moment, then nodded. All right, let's find out who wants me dead. The battle for survival had just begun. But now, they were done running. The desert wind howled across McGraw Ranch as Jace tightened the straps on his saddle. The stars above shone like cold, distant eyes, watching as he and Zara prepared for their next move. They weren't waiting for the bounty hunters to come anymore. They were going after the one who sent them. Jace turned to Zara, who stood beside his old hoverbike, her silver skin reflecting the moonlight. She was quiet, lost in thought. "You sure about this?" Jace asked. "Once we start this, there's no going back." Zara met his eyes. There was never any going back. Jace smirked. "Fair point." With that, they mounted up, Jace on his horse, Rust and Zara on the hoverbike. The engines rumbled to life, and together, they rode out into the night. Their destination, Rust Haven. Rust Haven, a town of shadows. By dawn, they reached the edge of the desert town. Rust Haven wasn't a place for decent folk. It was where criminals, smugglers, and bounty hunters gathered, where the law was nothing more than a suggestion. And if someone had put a price on Zara's head, this was the place to find answers. Jace pulled his hat low as they walked through the crowded streets. "Keep close, and keep your head down." Zara nodded, adjusting the hood of her cloak to hide her alien features. But even with her face shadowed, she still drew stares. People knew who she was. Jace could feel it. They stopped at a dusty old bar, its neon sign flickering weakly. Inside, the air was thick with cigar smoke and bad intentions. Jace walked up to the bartender, looking for a man who sells information. The bartender, a heavy-set man with cybernetic arms, grunted. "Depends on what you got to trade." Jace tossed a silver coin onto the counter. "Start talking." The bartender eyed the coin before leaning in. "You don't want to know, Cowboy." "I do." The bartender sighed. "All right. Name you're looking for is Letharkane. Big-time broker. Works for the people with real money." Jace frowned. "Where do I find him?" The bartender smirked. "He finds you." Before Jace could ask more, the doors slammed open. A group of bounty hunters stepped inside. Ambush in the bar. The lead hunter was a tall man in a long black coat, his face hidden under a wide-brimmed hat. His boots clicked against the wooden floor as he stepped forward. His eyes locked onto Zara. Well, didn't expect you to walk right into my lap." Jace turned, hand hovering near his gun. "You got a name, stranger." The man smiled. "Call me Marshal Dax. And that bounty you're protectin', it just doubled." The bounty hunters fanned out, hands resting on their weapons. The whole bar fell silent, the other patrons watching like vultures. Jace sighed. "Didn't come here for trouble." Marshal Dax chuckled. "Neither did I. But trouble's got a way of finding folk like us." Then he drew his gun. Jace moved first. His revolver cleared leather in a flash, the shot blasting Dax's hat clean off. The bounty hunter cursed, staggering back. Chaos erupted. Zara ducked as gunfire ripped through the bar, shattering glass and splintering wood. She clenched her fists, feeling the power building inside her. Jace rolled behind a table, firing off 3 quick shots. 2 bounty hunters went down hard, but more were coming. Zara took a deep breath. No more hiding. She stepped forward, eyes glowing bright. With a wave of her hand, a wave of invisible force blasted outward, sending tables, chairs, and bounty hunters flying. The entire bar shook. Dax, struggling to his feet, stared at her in shock. "Damn, no wonder they want you." Jace grabbed Zara's arm. "Time to go." Together, they burst through the back door, gunfire chasing them as they ran. Hunted. They raced through the alleys of Rust Haven, the sounds of shouting and pursuit close behind. Jace led them down a narrow street toward the stables. If they could just make it to their mounts, they cooled. A plasma shot exploded against the wall near Jace's head. They skidded to a stop as a figure stepped from the shadows. A man in a crimson suit, his eyes like two burning embers. He wasn't just a bounty hunter. He was something else. Something worse. Ziara's breath hitched. Luthar Kane. The man smiled. A pleasure to finally meet you, Miss Ziara. Jace raised his gun, but before he could fire, Kane lifted a single finger. Jace's body froze. His muscles locked up. His breath caught in his throat. He couldn't move. Ziara's eyes widened. What did you do to him? Kane chuckled. Relax. He's just paused. Ziara clenched her fists, power surging. Let him go. Kane tilted his head. Or what? You'll destroy another city, another fleet. Ziara flinched. Kane smiled. You see, I know what you are. I know what you're capable of. And that's why my employer wants you. Jace struggled against the invisible hold, but it was like fighting steel chains. Kane stepped closer. Come with me willingly, and I promise I won't kill your friend. Ziara looked at Jace. He was trying to fight, trying to protect her, even now. She couldn't let him die. But she couldn't be taken either. She exhaled, closing her eyes. When she opened them, they burned like stars. You made a mistake, Kane. The air shimmered, and then the world exploded. The alley behind the Rust Haven saloon erupted with energy. A wave of force rippled outward, sending crates, barrels, and debris flying in every direction. The very air shook with power as Ziara's silver skin glowed bright, her eyes burning like twin stars. Luthar Kane staggered back, his crimson coat whipping in the shockwave. But he didn't panic. He smiled. Now we're talking. Jace hit the ground hard, his body released from Kane's strange hold. He gasped for breath, his limbs aching. Ziara had just made her choice. She wouldn't run. She wouldn't be taken. She would fight. Kane chuckled, brushing dust from his sleeve. You really don't know what you are, do you? Ziara didn't answer. She moved. In a blink, she was on him. She swung her hand, and a shockwave of energy blasted forward. Kane dodged, moving with inhuman speed. Her attack shattered the wall behind him, sending bricks and metal crashing into the alley. Jace pulled himself up, his instincts taking over. Gun first, questions later. He fired, 3 perfect shots, straight at Kane's chest. The bullets stopped midair. They hung there, frozen, before melting into sparks and dropping to the ground. Jace swore, I hate magic. Kane sighed. Predictable. With a flick of his wrist, Jace was lifted off the ground, choking. An invisible force wrapped around his throat, crushing his breath. Ziara roared, throwing another pulse of power at Kane. This time, he didn't dodge. Instead, he absorbed it. The energy wrapped around him, flickering like fire, and his eyes flared brighter. He was feeding off her power. Ziara's heart pounded. How? Kane smirked. I told you, girl. I know what you are. He flicked his fingers, sending a backlash of energy straight at Ziara. She barely had time to react. The force hit her square in the chest, launching her backward into the alley wall. The impact cracked the stone, sending dust and rubble cascading down. Jace hit the ground, gasping. He rolled over, trying to steady his shaking hands. Kane turned to Ziara. You can't win. Ziara pushed herself up, pain shooting through her ribs. She wouldn't surrender. She wouldn't be taken. Not again. A desperate escape. Jace wiped the blood from his mouth. They were outmatched. Kane wasn't just some bounty hunter. He was something else. And if he could absorb Ziara's power, they had no chance. Jace's eyes darted around. He needed a plan. Fast. His gaze landed on the saloon's power generator, an old fusion coil. Unstable. Deadly. Perfect. Jace forced himself up, drawing his revolver. Ziara, he yelled. On my mark, hit him with everything you got. Ziara, still panting, nodded. Kane raised an eyebrow. A last stand. How disappointing. Jace grinned. Something like that. Then he shot the fusion coil. The alley lit up with sparks as the coil overloaded, sending a chain reaction of energy surging through the wall. Kane's expression finally changed. Surprise. Sierra didn't hesitate. Jace rubbed his chin. If we find out who hired him, maybe we can stop this before it gets worse. Sierra looked into the fire, her glowing eyes reflecting the flames. Or maybe it's already too late. Jace frowned. Don't talk like that. We ain't dead yet. Sierra exhaled. I won't let them take me, Jace. He met her gaze. They won't. But deep down, he wasn't sure if that was a promise he could keep. The storm arrives. Midnight settled over the desert. The wind outside howled like a warning. Jace sat by the cave entrance, keeping watch. His fingers rested on his revolver, nerves on edge. Something felt wrong. Then a sound. A whisper in the wind. Jace stood, eyes scanning the darkness. The desert stretched out before him, empty and still. But then, a flicker. A shadow moved. He wasn't alone. Jace's heart pounded. Sierra, wake up. Sierra's eyes snapped open just as the first shot rang out. Jace dove for cover as the entrance of the cave exploded in gunfire. The rock behind him shattered, sending dust into the air. Sierra rolled to the side, dodging a second blast. They found us. Jace cursed. Kane worked fast. They had no time left. Outside, figures moved through the night, their weapons glowing in the dark. At least 6 bounty hunters, maybe more. And then, a slow, deliberate clap. Luthar Kane stepped into the firelight. Untouched, unharmed, smiling. You should have kept running, Cowboy. Jace grit his teeth. And you should have stayed dead. Kane chuckled. Now. That explosion was cute, but I've survived worse. He glanced at Sierra. And you, my dear, you're running out of tricks. Sierra stood slowly, her power flickering weakly in her hands. Kane smirked. Tired, aren't you? I told you, you can't win. Jace raised his gun. Maybe she can't, but I ain't done yet. Then he fired. The shot was fast, too fast for Kane to stop. The bullet hit Kane's shoulder, forcing him back. His smile vanished. For the first time, he looked angry. You shouldn't have done that. He lifted his hand, and Jace felt the air tighten, his body locking up again. Sierra screamed. No. But this time, something changed. Jace didn't freeze. Instead, his revolver glowed. A golden light pulsed from the gun, and suddenly, Kane staggered back. His grip on Jace broke. Kane's eyes narrowed. What? Jace looked at his gun, shocked. It was Sierra. Her power was flowing into him, into his weapon. She was giving him her strength. Jace grinned. Now that's new. Kane growled. Impossible. Jace spun the revolver in his hand. Let's find out. The final shot. Kane charged. Jace fired. The bullet wasn't just a bullet. It was light. It blazed through the darkness, cutting through Kane's power like a blade. And it hit him. Kane screamed, his body convulsing as the energy ripped through him. He fell to his knees, clutching his chest. His eyes widened, filled with pain. No, this isn't. Jace cocked the revolver. Good night, Kane. Bang! The second shot sent Kane crashing to the ground. The desert went silent. For a long moment, nothing moved. Then, Kane's body began to fade. His form dissolved into mist, his presence vanishing into the night. Jace and Sierra watched as the wind carried him away, until there was nothing left. He was gone. The long ride home. Jace let out a slow breath, lowering his gun. Sierra stepped forward, her strength slowly returning. She touched Jace's shoulder. Are you all right? He smirked. Better than Cain. She looked out at the desert. Do you think he's really dead? Jace sighed. I hope so. But if not. He spun his revolver back into its holster. We'll be ready. Giara smiled. Where do we go now? Jace climbed onto his horse, reaching a hand down to her. Anywhere we want. Giara took his hand, and together, they rode off into the dawn. A cowboy and an alien girl. Partners. And free.